following in the document and are online, we're just in the standardizing tropical RGBs and warm rain. I actually have put a recommendation in, and it reads like this: developers are invited, we can't command, are invited to explore RGB suitable warm rain processes that may use, AL, machine learning, or microwave. We can refine. This is also a theme for training in RGBs in tropical regions, which is already the case. So the tropical people are already training this problem, but it's worthwhile recommending. Cool, anything else to say on that? Before we skip merrily on to the polar satellite RGB visualization, was there anything sort of really important to bring out of that? Thanks, Dan.
Something along the lines of continuing to explore techniques to standardize RGB imagery across sensors. I can write something nice in there if you want me to write something nice in there. So I can see something in there, about, to encourage utilization of polar RGBs and geostationary at the high latitudes, continue to explore when and where limb correction and intercalibration is appropriate to apply for science and applications. And then something about visual timeliness and visualization. Yeah, I don't think there's any place where we can view polar RGBs.
Can you use the microwave?
Yeah. So we should treat as a kind of forecaster's request that whenever the RGB made from polar orbiting satellites are to be available, that they will be informed by any kind of alert message that will appear at the screen saying, okay, hello, within half an hour you will get some RGB from polar orbiting satellite available.
Who is this recommendation to?
I don't think so it is recommendation, but maybe a good practice.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of a technical organizational type of, in the US, this always comes up. No matter what polar satellite you use in a test bed, they say, I would like an alert so I know when the data is available. And nobody's developed anything.
Cool. So I'm putting something in there just as you were speaking, Emily. Feel free to use that text to, as you said you wanted to write something as a recommendation, you could, yeah, cool. Oh, of course, sorry, you can't do the thing. Cool. Multi-purpose naming conventions. So I'd like to see, oh, I'm on the wrong screen now. Multi-purpose naming conventions, so I'd like to propose that we have done that. So we're kind of, the day land cloud fire Curtis RGB is now the day fire. Okay, recipe standardization. So anyone want to talk to this? So I'm looking over at Joel.
Yeah, we had a good group. I don't know, maybe people that were in that group could raise their hands. That's perhaps the best way to just show the folks that we had there. But we had a good discussion amongst the team, and really appreciate that Maria had already assembled a document, and we used that as a starting point. So the first point here is that we discussed using a generic word range instead of min and max, because we decided that using min and max to determine as terms for what is a value map is confusing. Somebody could think it could be the maximum value of the geophysical parameter, such as a brightness temperature, or it could be the maximum color. And I think that had led to some confusion previously. So we decided to just use the word range, and then to handle the concept of what this community has largely called as inversion, and we're going to try to change that now to reversed. We are going to add a checkbox so that there's a standard consideration for when the min and the max are opposite of their contribution to the full color. And that's what says secondarily there. We also decided that there wasn't much benefit in decimal places that were, 2 places or beyond, especially for brightness temperature. So we're going to use just 1 decimal place from now on. We are going to try to use percentages for reflectance units. And again, we'll allow those out to 1 decimal. Temperature units, as long as it's specified, we can have either. I think we're probably going to retain K in our web page, but the US has quick guides that are in degrees Celsius, which is more intuitive for users. So the important thing is just to specify the units that you are using. And I thought that was a pretty fruitful discussion. We didn't really have a lot of dissension. We just mainly wanted to make sure that as we saw recipes in the future, that it was fully specified and that we were conveying things that were completely specified. The last thing was the gamma parameter and correction. And I think the consensus from the group was that it's too hard to try to agree on a standard and get everybody to convert it one way or the other, because there's just so many different recipes that are done one way or another at this point. So the key moving forward is going to be when recipes are presented with gamma, that we use that we specify it in the header, whether it's X to the gamma variable or X to the 1 over gamma variable. And that should be the indication of how it's specified. And then also that gamma function, to limit that to 2 decimal places at the very most, so that there's some consistency there, because we've seen some cases where gamma is brought out to 4, and that's a little extensive. So I will open it there to if there's any others in the group that I did not capture correctly. I want to give it to the group members first, just to make sure we have consensus, and then we'll give it over to the rest of the room. Okay, get a thumbs up.
Yeah, I have a question. So for the reflectance, there is the solar zenith corrected reflectance and then the uncorrected. So the uncorrected, you would see the diurnal cycle, and then when you correct it, you wouldn't. And I think that makes a huge difference. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so if somebody implements that, it would be specified in lieu of the band indicator. So if you're going to do if you're going to do an RGB that has a solar zenith angle corrected 0.64, then you would have to list that as part of the 0.64. If somebody just says 64 or viz, then it's assuming that it's not corrected. Everything else, again, this is mainly for just communicating the recipes moving forward, because there's been some various ways of doing that, and this will help to standardize it.
If you do that correction, dividing by cosine solar zenith or whatever, it might change what the actual limit should be, because is that not true, Emily? It should. Okay, maybe not. Just brightens everything. Okay, take that back. Yep.
And I'm going to start first with the range and whether you have inverted or not. And I'm going to say, as a trainer, that's really confusing, because even if it's checked, the user doesn't know if it's already been inverted or if you need to invert it. And so, and another thing is sometimes we use these like a little box with the range right next to the image. And so it's easier to say, okay, this is where we have 0 mapping to 0 brightness counts, and this is where we have it mapping to 255. So I suggest we just remove the invert it, simplify it, and just have the range as it goes from what is the 0 brightness count to the 255 for each channel. It helps with interpretation.
Yeah, go on, Jordan.
So the challenge is that we don't know if we do it like that, we don't know if they're following the standard or not. And that was a key point of discussion within our group, that we are aware that some users may be confused of thinking that it's double. Like they could do it one way or another and then reverse it. However, we think that that's a relatively low risk, because if you have the geophysical value that's greater on the left side and you also have inverted checked, that we would, and the others are the lesser value on the left side, that forecasters or users would, at the very worst, just look at it and then say, oh, this doesn't match what I've seen before, and then just change it. And that was how we thought that was handled. Now, there was a brief discussion that what we are going to do is fully color the value on the right side of the range as a hint to indicate that the color on the right is the full color value. And that was the outcome from our discussion.
I'm a little confused. Is the discussion here just whether or not to include the word inverted? And that's it?
We decided
It's, well, okay, even reversed. It's like, what does this mean? Because if you have a range here, isn't it assuming that you're mapping, and I see Bodo says, well, inversion, and the wording they're using now is reversed. Although the challenge for us is that you're mapping something, you're mapping your first value and your second value. And everything in between is either linear or some function of the gamma. And I think that's the simplest approach, because when you throw in there reversed, the user does not know. Now, do I have to, even if you're interpreting it, and that's what this is for, it's always good to just have a standard that the left side, the first value, is what the 0 is, the second value is what the 255 is, and then whatever the relationship is in between.
Can I just quickly add here, this is historically speaking, I think it's possible that the invert came in because some of the viewing software sort of had that as, if you like, almost like a button you could click. So it's come into the lingo that way. I fully agree in terms of actually putting a color for the maximum, coloring the number that's the maximum and leaving the minimum, in other words, where there is no saturation, as black. I find that really effective for teaching. The students take to it intuitively a lot quicker than if I just left the range in black, the numbers.
Okay. Well, this is Jose here, yeah, and we know I was part of the group, and this is a democracy and this is consensus. From a personal point of view, I mean, I have to agree because it's a vote thing, right? But I still think the reversed and inverted term is confusing. Our field comes from one of the bases of what we do is mathematics. And if you just put, like, they had an example up there, there you go, 30 to minus 20, it's already evident what you need to do when you code it. So I really think the double negation of putting the term inverted or reverse is more confusing than having the user do it that way. And if they don't get it right, they realize, oh, I did it the other way. I think we're adding an extra confusion by using, but that's, again, this is a democracy. So, I mean.
Okay, thank you. Well, my concern is about the word reversed because for our reception systems, we have already adapted the word I mean the letter I for inverted, and then R for reflectance. So when you are doing a recipe and you see I, because you have to select the channels. When you see I, you know that it is inverted. It should be inverted. When you see R, you know that it should be reflected. So I wonder if you use the word reverse, how it's going to affect the understanding of. So I'm just asking how it's going to what do you call, to affect the understanding, and that may also requires us to really change the way we have been doing things. So that's my concern about this word reverse and inverted.
I think we have a disconnect because there's a need for Maria's document for all the developers to agree what needs to be on there so that we can implement across agencies. And I don't think that meets the user needs. So I think there probably needs to be further discussion on how to optimize those tables that really gives the user understanding. I mean, I like Bernie's idea under Gamma, you put linear, and I don't know if I heard you correctly because I was half typing. You put linear and then like the little equation or something, or I don't know. But we need to make a beautiful artistic table that follows educational principles that gives the users exactly what they need. Because there's all kinds of discussions. Do users even need to know the ranges in the Gamma?
And my response to that is the users who have expertise or who want to learn more and develop more and are also trainers, those are the ones who use the information the most. And I'm also thinking about a lot of small countries, small island countries, or even universities that take these recipes and program them up. And we've gotten more questions on the use of the range, well, and even more on the use of what gamma means, because depending upon if you look at the documentation from EU-METSAT versus what's in a few of the RGBs guides from the US, gamma is represented differently. And so when they program it up, what they usually end up doing is sending us an image and saying, this doesn't look like yours. What am I doing wrong? And also when we're trying to show them about it, all the published documentation on gamma shows the original or points to the original EU-METSAT documentation. And so that's where it gets confusing. Even GOES-R documentation in your chapter 5, you point to that and you show it as 1 over gamma.
Real quick, Jordan, I was going to suggest maybe we plan to do this. At the top of this document, right above everything, you put an explanation of what everything means in these tables. Put the equation, in this case, gamma means 1 over gamma or whatever it is. I don't know the convention that was used here. On the left side of the range means corresponding to 0 brightness counts. The right side means corresponding to 255. And that way you see the rest of them, you can go back and figure it out exactly. Now, yeah, you're right that the users may need more information than that, like Emily was saying, but I don't know that this document here is the one go-to for everything.
When Kevin first did these RGB quick guides, he had color beam, inputs, and then he had interpretation. If you had a minimum influence from the component or greater influence from the component. And, it really put the users towards the interpretation of it, that I know if there's less green, it means this. If there's more green, it means that. And so we have to ask that the quick guides were really for the users, not for the developers. And so that's probably where our mistake was. What do the users really need? And if there is a user that needs that detailed information, they need to take a look at this document, or somebody from another country needs to take a look at this document.
Although we did get some feedback from forecasters, and I think Frank Alsheimer was one. Well, and this gets back to, is it a colorblind user? And they like to look at the values. And so Frank was one of the ones that fully agreed that we add the gamma. There are only really a handful of ones that have a gamma value, and they may be increasing, but it still is that difference. And I've even noticed I have to get back with the tool Because I don't know if that code is different than what EUMETSAT gamma shows even. The one that's now that Maria, is Maria still here? Where is she? She's gone. Okay.
So there was a few comments on this as well from Buddo. I don't know if you can speak, Buddo.
Yeah, I'm sure. Look, in terms of just immediately, in terms of what Bernie was talking about, in terms of the gamma, one consideration is that when you're changing your RGB from mid-latitude to tropical, and I'm thinking about the day convection RGB and also the night microphysics RGB, gamma does come into the equation. So, you know, that's just something for consideration. The other part, in terms of actually using the ranges and gamma in the recipes, and so I have to do that. I have to teach my students that because they're trainee forecasters, and once they graduate, they will be able, using the visual weather software, to manipulate the ranges and gammas. And I know that in some other forecasting centers, you know, forecasters don't have that capability. They're just basically looking at what's been prepared for them. So again, another consideration. And last but not least, I have put together actually these easy to use guides, and I mentioned that 2 days ago during my presentation, and I'm more than happy to share some ideas about that.
We need to find a way to close this and keep moving.
We do. I'm going to suggest, so there's the recipe document, which if we implement in these terms, and let's see what that looks like. And then there's the what we do in the quick guides. We might want to reflect, say, different regions, just reflect on how can we make our quick guides better for our users. The one thing I'm going to suggest we do in Europe is that little triangle from the UMET train tool, that we should actually have that in the quick guide where there's a gamma. So not only do people see a number, but they see a thing that shows you, okay, this is what this looks like, just to see how that works. And we see what we do there. Is that enough for us to keep going, Jordan?
So I do want to, the topic here is presenting RGB recipes. And if you notice this, and what you noticed, what we've already shown is it's actually very, very similar. These guidelines are very, very similar to what was in the original document. So, I mean, yes, we had this discussion about the word inverted versus reversed. I think most people don't feel strongly one way or the other. Some people thought inverted could confuse things with gamma. I certainly understand that. If people want to use reverse in the future, that would be fine. But everything that is in here is already in the current version of the document, with the exception of moving the word inverted to a separate column. And then making sure that when we present to this group and any other RGB users that need to know the full amount to create it, that may be a user or not, that we present it with these terms.
It's not just creating it though, it's interpreting it as well.
Yeah, but we're presenting it.
Right. So some of the wording helps avoid confusion on the user end, which then may discourage them from using it if they're not able to understand it.
So
yeah, I don't think there's any response to that.
Yeah, so this is what my proposal is. So it's an open question, but to create the recipe guide in these terms, see what it looks like. Let's see if we've reduced confusion, and to experiment with a couple of the quick guides to see if we can reduce confusion there, and then see where we stand. So it's not this doesn't only happen once. We're going to be talking about this for decades. I bet you this was in meeting notes number 1. Nah, probably number 2, because number 1, it was like, yay, this is great. We've got a thing, we'll write it down. And then the chaos starts. Is that okay? Is that enough so that we can move on?
We need to move on.
We do need to move on. Okay, moving on. Although that's an important thing, right? Downscaling, Hammer, downscaling, anything you want to bring out from that needs to be a recommendation? Does it need to be a recommendation?
There's one action. There's one
an
action, and it's for you and Yvonne.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, you cannot make a recommendation without sorting out that problem. Yeah, because the native channels, MSI is saying that is going to be 2 by 2. But they are also saying that they are going to provide a one by 1 kilometer RGB over, for Africa. So,
Because we need to keep moving. So,
okay.
cool, we're on it. Alrighty, thank you. Sorry, 2 screens. This is confusing me. So Vesa, if you're there, that's one to note. Just the FCI channel resolutions and the what's in the Africa pug. We might want to check with Sally what's going on. Little internal UMatsat business there. So training, new ideas, repository, etc. Anything to bring out of that? To real highlights. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I can very quickly cover this, but really what came out of that conversation was starting with the basics of imagers and being able to interpret the individual bands themselves, and then building those into the RGBs to help give this more comprehensive understanding of what the imagery is actually providing to you. Also, in terms of then transitioning this to things like operations, also having the training that's set up be more in a problem-based format rather than just here's a product and here's what it does and here's kind of a general topic. So being able to then provide a problem-based format was one that I think we've generally coalesced around as being valuable. And then the last thing is kind of related to the first one, but it's multi-tiered training approaches and kind of starting with that base level with the individual bands and then working your way up to more complex applications and products as well. So starting with the individual bands first, and then you also have the RGBs that have the individual bands as the individual components, and then working up to then things like channel differences as well, working with the gamma as well and how that changes your interpretation. So that's just the quick rundown of the major topics, and the ones that were in bold were the ones that came out there the most.
Cool. Alrighty. Any thoughts or comments? There?
Do we want to mention Sophia's comment really quick on the last? It looks like she was suggesting looking at the way you train does the documentation on the previous topic, and that Bodo agrees that works well.
So Zophia's suggesting, so if you look at the RGB recipes document that UMAT train, these are explained in a very nice way from the beginning. So we can have a look at that. I suspect that's because Maria wrote it as well, or she was heavily involved in writing it. Cool.
Maria pointed that out, but that document.
Yeah. Color bars for users. Who had this one? Anything to bring out in particular?
Yeah, Ty.
I think this was the one that YJ brought up, but I'll try to make it short and sweet for everyone since we are about to have lunch. But we kind of talked about how, kind of the first point was talked about how cloud tops are kind of viewed as, say, 27,000, 30,000 feet. The color red has higher values, so we assign it red. Some people interpret it as that. Sometimes people interpreted cloud top as cold. It's cold in the atmosphere up there. So what color do you align with that? Blue. So, just some different perspectives on that. How do we decide certain colors for a color table for an RGB? Lee mentioned that there was a SET team, a satellite enhancement team that would come together in previous years and do this. Do we bring that back? Do we grab a couple of people from around the world, country to bring that together? And then sometimes it got brought up continuous and discrete color schemes. Sometimes continuous color schemes are hard to decipher between what is what. So an example was the air mass with warm moist and warm dry. Sometimes those colors are hard to see. And I guess with kind of tying it back to the training aspect, can color tables be brought into this to enhance forecasters' perspectives on certain colors for certain RGBs?
Thanks, Ty. Real quick before Jordan, Bodo, did you want to verbalize that?
Yeah, very quickly. I like the idea of, and my students do as well, the idea of having, say, for example, the sandwich product, the infrared layer, starting from blue -20 and then going up to red as you get colder, because red is an alerting color. So I'm going back to what Curtis was saying about using the fire RGB and presenting it intuitively. Basically red color, danger, thunderstorm. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, just a little bit confused about, and this is perhaps a US issue we have to resolve, but RGBs and AWIPS2 cannot be edited. You mean we can't replace the bands? Was that the criticism?
Adjusting like the pixels and stuff like that in it, right, Lee? Is that what you were saying? Or?
Yeah, thanks. I thought we were referring to the fact that you don't have a color bar appear in the RGBs and the AWIPs. And so you can't play around with a color bar or color table like you can with other types of graded data. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, to move on from, yeah.
Yeah, and because I don't see RJ here. Oh, you are. Do you want to make a comment? Yeah, and I'll just add that part of it is on Slider putting some labels to some of the colors.
It's a very difficult problem, so I'm just brought up the problem. So we continue to talk about that. It's not a simple issue here.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna,
Yeah. So I have a question here because what do we mean? What we want to do with? What do we want to do with the color bar? Do we want to highlight with the color bar just the most important aspect that the RGB is showing, or we want to highlight everything? Because if that is the case, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for some RGBs, not all. Yeah. So I think we have to decide really what we.
So I think just maybe one to note, because we're about to reopen this conversation. So the one thing with open space, when it's done, it's done. So this is important and it matters, and color bars are an important thing. So the question for now, just as we head towards lunch, is there anything that massively needs to be said now that does not stop us talking about color bars in the future? Yeah, Emily.
High level, I think color bars is maybe a misnomer for what we're trying to get at, because labels. So I think the recommendation is continuing to explore single channel overlays that have color bars to highlight features, to display labels that help with interpretation. I think the part about how is the RGB made is covered by what Ivan was talking about as far as best practices for creating an RGB. But I think there's a huge trade space here that people are picking up on, that, you know, there's examples with the air mass and overlaying a channel, overlaying sandwich, labels and such.
Okay. Alrighty, I'm gonna skip over AWIPS GFE. Is that okay? Yeah. So yeah,
we could probably just delete it if it's not something.
No, it's cool. I mean, actually, what would be super interesting is if you want to drop some notes in, because the rest of us might learn something from whatever you talked about, but that's fine. So validating RGBs, testbeds, OPGs, and the like. Any real highlights to bring out of this, apart from this is important, matters, it's cool? Any
so
kind of...
This was Emily's topic. I know, sorry, Emily. So the topic of validating RGBs and testbeds, if there's any highlights you want to make here.
I guess maybe a recommendation for readiness levels for experimental RGBs to be considered and placed in an annex and tested within a testbed. That's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, so the idea here is people have lots of good ideas for RGBs. How do we test them, make them become more mature, and then sort of grant them into some sort of operational system depending on where you are, whether it be AWIPS in the US or other things elsewhere. And the testbed idea is sort of bringing together a bunch of users to look at it and form an opinion over time and looking at lots of cases.
Cool, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so going along with that recommendation is more international collaboration between the various test beds. So in the US, we basically have 3 satellite liaisons who work with 3 test beds and or proving grounds. And so having that collaborative nature between our test beds and the international community
I'm just looking at the thing to see if Virsa is online, but he's not online anymore. So yes, we're in Virsa and Ivan are our point of contact, and Sarah for Africa. Cool. Satellite SATAP, GIS format, VDS RGBs.
I don't recall who sent these notes, but if anybody wants to speak to it, they can speak up. Curtis.
So most of this topic related to things that we need to do to improve Slider. And so, yeah, we have a number of items to work on. That's a short version.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Yeah, I can later add Slider to the topic here because I guess that was the main topic that I didn't include.
And the other one to mention is anyone who's not in the US, talk to Morocco because their little tool is very open source and very movable. Marcial, have you ever talked to Yasin? Marcial, you should talk because you've got similar levels of awesomeness going on. Yeah. And I want to see your stuff as well. Cool. Multi-data RGBs. Anyone want to talk to this?
Oh, yeah. Getting a lot of stuff done back in this corner. So this was a great discussion with just a few of us, but so we certainly did not solve the world's problems, but it was basically kind of exploring, the next step, not using just imagery in an RGB, but can we use other stuff as components in an RGB? And I guess we don't really know if people are doing that. I'm not doing it, but the idea of would it be useful to have like TPW as one of the components of an RGB. If we talked in more detail about GLM RGBs or GLM plus imagery RGBs, they tested something in the HWT a few years ago, but that didn't really go anywhere. For fun, I have created a few, but I haven't really shared them. But is this something that would be useful and maybe it could be shared? Some of the Weather Service people thought it might be worth pursuing some of these ideas. And then NWP and RGBs, could you include NWP fields as a component? We kind of, in talking about it, realized the difficulties in doing so, but then we got into a tangent of best practices for loading RGBs with NWP fields overlaid. So it was a great brainstorming discussion.
Cool.
Yeah, the topic of TPW as a component came up independently in the discussion of the warm rain. And so it's very much an R&D idea, something to test and see if it works.
We're going to hit that again, I think, when we hit HCL. Okay, Himawari 9 adjustments.
Should I take this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this was from Taro, and if you saw Taro's presentation on Tuesday, he talked about how some of the bands of Himawari 9 have slightly different spectral response functions than those from Himawari 8. And the result is, for example, in band 7, the 3.9 band, there's as much as about a 5 Kelvin difference. And the result of that is with RGBs, you end up with some different colors. And so the question at hand is, does JMA need to adjust RGB recipes a bit to make it more consistent with what Himawari 8 looked like? The conclusion was, we don't know yet. And so what we recommend is JMA to look at more RGBs than just the one example that Taro presented, including and especially night microphysics. Emily pointed out how there's a significant difference from Severi night microphysics versus Himawari due to differences in the spectral response. So Taro is going to provide some imagery, and we suggest that Rion and Bodo be part of this conversation once the examples are provided. And so we don't really know yet whether we're going to suggest a change or not. It's going to require a little bit more, a few more examples to decide.
Cool.
Can I make a quick comment? Certainly through the VLab, it's a superb way of being able to generate local case studies with Himawari 9 data, and then to be able to, and because I have the capability within the Bureau to be able to modify RGBs within our visual weather software, I'm very interested in that.
Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess Dan mentioned the 5 Kelvin difference, and I understand the spectral response function is different, because the radiance is coming from another set of wavelengths. But when it's inverted to a brightness temperature, they should actually be consistent. So what's going on?
Not necessarily, because if you shift.
So I'm going to just notice that lunch is coming up.
Let's take this offline. I can explain later. Yeah.
Sorry, really sorry to interrupt. Kind of, because the discussion's super interesting.
One more comment really quick.
This is focused on Himawari, but we might want to broaden it to say, you know, continue to explore when and where sensor-specific RGB recipe adjustments are appropriate for differences in spectral characteristics.
Agree. This is bound to come up again and again as new sensors are go into orbit.
Cool. I'll turn it into a sentence in a minute. Color deficiencies. Okay, to move on to niche RGBs and color deficiency?
Yes. Anyone want to speak to this?
I think some of the recommendations right now is to that we're working on is to move the air mass RGB that has been shifted for color vision efficiency, move that into AWIPS. Same with the RGB that Bill has developed for dust, and then find a way to also make that available to other groups, other agencies outside the Weather Service. So that's kind of the first step. And then eventually having maybe another round of forecasters with color vision deficiency look at new RGBs and determine if there's any other RGBs that could use some changing or adapting for that specific color vision deficiency.
Any other comments?
Cool. I also added the line just about including color deficiency shifts in the cookbook as well, just as a place to put that knowledge. Alrighty, standards for true color.
I mentioned this earlier, but in short, we recommend using the term true color RGB for an R for red, red, blue, blue, green, green RGB, and that UMETSAT begin to phase out the term natural color and begin to phase in dayland cloud with an acknowledgement that that may take a while. And Curtis also recommended applying that green band correction that we've talked about a lot for 0.51. And I know I've talked to UMETSAT about this a lot in the past.
Yeah. Looking around, seems happy. Yeah. The rise of the machine.
So for this one, I think we could say AI and ML could be powerful for translating training into the other languages, using it for RGB development and picking optimal thresholds or best channels, and to tackle niche topics or limitations of RGBs. We had mentioned a couple niche topics. I don't know if it's worth mentioning that: warm rain, blowing snow, fire hotspots, CI.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's quite cool to, because they're all applications. It's not like the AI, it's the, what's the thing you're trying to do. Cool. Okay. New things on FCI, especially the 0.9 band. Anything super important for everybody on that?
Yeah, just quickly, these are the things you can discover. And the other thing is we're happy to discover more. I won't go into details. What can we do? Yeah, there are some recommendations what to dig in from this channel, but it looks cool, it looks promising, and Sira has idea maybe to get some of the questions to one of the student graduate and maybe work on this. So all other question marks, if you have them, forward to me or Dan, and we'll figure it out.
Cool.
We also suggest pulling in the data when it's available from FCI, because that'll be the true, instead of attempting to simulate it and perhaps doing it wrong.
And just so you know, so this will be one of the RGBs that I suspect will have a band ratio in it rather than a band difference.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. So, but, you know, maybe not, but we'll see how that rolls. Just checking the chat. So, by the way, but I have seen your comment about the VLab and the test beds, so that's cool. RGB workshop frequency and the WMO webpage. Who had this one? Was that you, Bernie?
Bernie, was this you?
We had some recommendations, meeting every 2 years instead of every 5 years. Because personnel, technology, and user adaptations are changing rapidly, so.
Cool.
Are others in agreement?
Yep.
Okay. Developing a landing page hosted by the WMO Space Program. And then content may to be determined. Initial suggestions are to either put it on Moodle pages or the global campus library or both. And there we have some considerations on who makes the decisions on what content to include. So if there's any volunteers who would like to work on web pages and Moodle resources, let us know.
And those of us involved in the VLab are automatically volunteered.
Say what?
Those of us involved in the VLab are automatic volunteers.
Okay. And so I think if you go down, or is at the bottom? Seems like.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. So there was a recommendation to.
Oh, yeah, there was. There you go, there. Sorry.
To SSU to create an official RGB. Well, we were wondering if we should have an official committee or a working group to address these, and I'm not really sure.
Yeah, we can ask us to see what they say. Yeah.
Okay.
2 years it is.
Done. And RGB versus HSL. Key recommendations.
It's noteworthy this is the last topic before lunch.
Yeah, what we discussed here was that there were different color spaces other than RGB. And this is an RGB workshop. So if we really wanted to broaden the scope, we could probably call it, like a color spaces workshop. I don't know if there's, it was uncertain. I presented some work that I actually done about 6 years ago on using other color spaces because our eyes don't see in RGB. We see different perceptions than what computer monitors show. And so there's some other color spaces that perhaps lead to color composites and color spaces that are easy to interpret. So there was no major outcome other than whether we want to jump into that additional space as an extension of this work or whether RGBs are enough of a handful for us at this point. We didn't really talk too much about NA WIPs RGBs, unfortunately, and I think the TowerS team is going to maybe look into some of this work in the future.
Yeah, that's something we can take offline for weather service specific.
Cool.
Last call for comments here.
Just on that one, I can imagine this is where you might end up throwing like something like a product on the L to do something interesting, but we'll see where that one goes. All righty.
So I think 45 minutes is enough for lunch. So eat quickly, come back at top of the hour. I think it's sandwiches today. All right. We are breaking.